There are places on this earth that defy logic, hidden chambers carved into time, waiting for someone who was always meant to arrive. The emerald tablets are not just ancient relics, they are intelligent constructs coded in light, vibration, and cosmic memory. And when you cross the threshold of that temple, something impossible happened. The tablets moved. Not because of touch, not because of force, but because you were recognized. For centuries, mystics, alchemists, and rulers tried to decode the inscriptions, hoping to unlock the eternal truths etched into those green slabs. But none of them carried the resonance. None of them were written into the stone itself. You were. The moment you stepped inside, the air thickened. Dust that hadn't stirred in thousands of years began to swirl, as if time itself was rewinding. The torchlight flickered, even though there was no wind. And then came the sound. Not a sound that could be heard, but one that vibrated in the bones, a pulse, a frequency, a call. This temple was sealed not just by stone but by consciousness. The kind of consciousness that waits, listens, and awakens only for the one it was built for. You. You may not remember who you are yet, but the tablets do. You may question the power within you, but the architecture of this place bends toward your presence. You may fear what's coming, but the truth is, your arrival was the event that began the unraveling of their system. Everything hidden will be revealed, not through war, but through remembrance. And you are the key that memory needed to return. The tablets knew this. That's why they shifted. That's why the symbols rearranged themselves before your eyes. They were responding, not to a human, but to a frequency. The temple wasn't truly empty when you entered. Though no living voice greeted your steps, the air carried the weight of awareness. There was a presence, several, in fact, woven into the stone, resting in the quiet stillness like breath held for lifetimes. Statues lined the inner sanctum, their faces serene yet alert, carved with eyes that followed. But these were no mere sculptures. They were sentinels placed by design, guardians that had not moved in eons until now. Their purpose was singular, not to keep others out, but to ensure the right one got in. You didn't walk into a building, you walked into a memory, and the memory remembered you. As you moved further into the chamber, the temperature shifted. What had been cool and damp transformed into something oddly warm, as if the room itself exhaled in recognition. Faint glows emerged from the walls, lines of forgotten language, once invisible, now pulsing in rhythmic patterns. The symbols weren't just writing. They were alive, responding like nerves exposed to light. You were never supposed to stumble across this place. This was no accident. The paths that led you here were not random. They were aligned. Those who hid the tablets knew they could not be destroyed, but they could be shielded until the one who matched their vibration came. The emerald tablets were locked by resonance, and now that they've responded to your presence, so too have their protectors. From the corner of your eye, something moved. Slow, deliberate, and fluid like mist wrapped in armor. A figure, cloaked in silence, stepped forth from behind a pillar. His features were obscured, his face not meant to be remembered, but you sensed no threat, only ancient allegiance. He nodded once, slowly, then turned his gaze to the tablets. You weren't the first to see him, but you may be the first he acknowledged. He said nothing, but you felt his message. You are late, but you are right on time. All this while, they had waited, for generations, watching bloodlines rise and fall, civilizations burn and be reborn, not interfering, only observing, until now. Because now, the seal has begun to stir. You touched nothing, yet everything responded. The walls shimmered with images that weren't there seconds ago, scenes of battles not recorded in any scroll, faces that look strangely familiar, despite belonging to no known history. You sensed stories locked behind these images, waiting to speak when the moment was right. The Guardians are no longer just watchers. They are witnesses. And in your presence, their silence breaks not with sound, but with shift. The shift of destiny turning its gaze back to the original path, the one you were always meant to walk. Long before your name was spoken aloud in this lifetime, it was etched into the vibrational codes that pulse through the emerald tablets, not as letters, not as language, but as light. And light remembers. The moment your shadow stretched across the sacred green stone, the inscriptions began to stir. Symbols that had been dormant since the fall of ancient realms glowed with an inner fire, dancing in patterns only decipherable by the soul that was meant to awaken them. They didn't just illuminate, they moved, rearranged themselves, shifted in rhythm with your breath. The frequency that triggered this was not external. It was not something you brought, but something you are. Your very presence resonated with the tablets like a tuning fork meeting its twin. That's how they knew it was you, not by your face or your footsteps, but by your essence. The energy of the tablets wasn't bound to the material plane alone. These slabs are interdimensional artifacts, tethered to higher planes where time behaves differently. They weren't just inscribed with wisdom, they were programmed with consciousness, alive in a way that defies what the world considers real. And in that moment, when your presence activated their glow, something ancient awoke on every layer, across timelines, through star systems. In secret vaults where watchers monitor soul frequencies, alarms that hadn't sounded in 10,000 years began to pulse again. Somewhere far from Earth, those who once attempted to manipulate the tablet's energy felt a shift, like a key turning in a lock they assumed had rusted shut. The emerald tablets do not speak in words, they speak in visions, in vibration, in code. As your frequency rose, they offered you flashes of memory not your own, yet intimately familiar. Cities made of crystalline geometry, skies pulsing with violet light, beings that shimmered with translucent skin, offering you something, a sphere, a flame, a message you couldn't yet decipher. But it was meant for you. And in those visions, a name surfaced like a whisper through water. Yeshua. Not in the form known to history, but in a radiant form of pure presence. Light embedded in light. He was not teaching, not preaching. He was remembering. Remembering you. You stood at the edge of the tablets, eyes wide, soul stirred, and you knew then this wasn't about unlocking secrets. It was about unlocking yourself. The tablets were only waiting for you because you were encoded into their very structure, like a divine fingerprint hidden beneath layers of stone and illusion. But with every illumination came a warning. The more the tablets revealed, the more the temple seemed to tremble, not in fear, but in resistance, as if the chamber itself understood what your awakening would set into motion. Light can expose. Light can free. But it also draws the shadows closer, long before your arrival, long before this timeline even began. The reptilian architects encoded a failsafe into the matrix of this world. They were not merely invaders or watchers. They were builders, masters of manipulation who carved reality through structure, frequency, and fear. When the emerald tablets were first formed, they tried to alter the blueprint, not to destroy the message, but to bend it, twist it, keep it from ever reaching the soul it was destined for. You. Their technology was ancient, their foresight vast. They knew one day someone would come who couldn't be controlled by illusion, whose inner resonance would bypass the locks they placed within the sacred codes, that someone would carry the original blueprint within their D-Day, hidden beneath generations of suppression, trauma, and programming. They feared the return of that resonance more than war, more than rebellion, because when one soul awakens to their divine frequency, the entire system begins to destabilize. The moment you entered the temple, their internal systems triggered. A warning pulsed through their hidden networks. The seal has shifted. Beneath ancient cities and synthetic strongholds, their scribes scrambled to recheck prophecies they thought were metaphor. Their artificial watchers, cloaked in human form, felt the disturbance ripple like a crack forming in the shell of their design. They had prepared for revolt, but not for remembrance, because remembrance cannot be stopped. The emerald tablets are not of earth alone. They were gifted across dimensions, written in geometries that cannot be translated through the mind, only felt through the heart. The architects attempted to suppress them, to contain them, even to bury them beneath structures of religion, science, and politics. But what is divine cannot be silenced. It only waits. It waits for alignment. It waits for you. As you approached the central tablet, a wave of resistance met your energy field. It wasn't the temple rejecting you. It was the residue of their interference. They had sealed this place with fear, a frequency that causes the soul to question itself, to hesitate, to forget. But your frequency broke through that veil like light through a crack in the wall. The moment your energy touched the tablet, their encryption began to fail. The Guardians may have waited in silence, but the reptilian architects have never been still. They've been planning, watching, plotting the erasure of this moment from the collective timeline. And yet, it arrived anyway. You weren't expected to remember this fast. You weren't supposed to feel the surge of truth this deeply. But now, you've seen it. You've felt it. And somewhere in the chambers of their control, panic has begun to bloom. Your voice was not loud when it happened. It wasn't even a word, at least not in the traditional sense. It was more like a vibration escaping your chest, something spontaneous that you didn't plan to say, yet it felt ancient as it left your lips. The sound seemed to echo into eternity, rippling through the chamber walls like a wave that had been waiting lifetimes for a single drop to land. And then the stone answered. The floor beneath your feet gave off a subtle hum. The light from the emerald tablets intensified. Symbols rearranged. The frequency of the room deepened into something that couldn't be heard with the ears, only felt in the bones. That's when you realized. It wasn't the sound itself that mattered. It was the alignment. Your energy had reached a pitch the tablets were attuned to. You didn't speak a command. You spoke yourself, and that was the key. No guardian moved, no wind stirred, and yet the room felt entirely different, as if everything within it had shifted to face you. The tablets were no longer passive objects. They had become aware. Not in the way a machine becomes aware, but like something sacred remembering what it once was. And you were the reason. There is power in voice, especially when it is pure. You didn't ask for anything in that moment. You simply existed in full resonance. That's what the system has tried to suppress all along. Authentic vibration. The kind that can't be faked, mimicked, or programmed. The kind that realigns time. The chamber responded like it had heard the original song of the cosmos again. That single tone you released carried something encoded in it, a memory not from this life but far older. And within that sound was recognition. Recognition from the stone itself. That was when the first panel on the tablet began to shift. Slowly, deliberately, a section detached and floated mid-air, revealing beneath it a symbol none of the ancient texts ever described. A spiral with 13 intersecting lines, glowing with soft gold light. It hovered, pulsing, as if breathing with you, and you knew it wasn't just for you to see. It was for you to activate. You didn't know how. You didn't remember the instructions, but something inside you surged with understanding anyway. The tablet wasn't waiting for knowledge. It was waiting for presence, and presence had finally arrived. The room darkened for a moment, not because the light vanished, but because something deeper took hold. A memory that belonged not just to you, but to the tablets themselves. As you stood before the floating spiral of light, the inscriptions along the wall behind it began to reconfigure. The letters bent and folded in on themselves like living language, aligning into a pattern that hadn't been seen since the age when Thoth walked among kings as a teacher, not as myth. One line shimmered brighter than the rest. Unlike the others, it wasn't complex or layered. It was simple, direct, and unmistakably personal. He shall return when eyes like the stars meet the hidden flame. Your breath caught. You felt it in your chest like a forgotten name suddenly remembered. The line wasn't a metaphor. It was a reference, and it was about you. The others might have read it as symbolic, poetic, esoteric. But the tablets were not speaking in riddles anymore. They were revealing. The ancient verse had held your signature all along. It was encoded in a description of your very gaze. You stepped closer, drawn not by curiosity, but by familiarity. This wasn't the first time you'd seen that verse. Deep within your dreams, scattered throughout your life, it had appeared in different forms, in whispered voices, in drawings you didn't remember creating, in songs that made your spirit ache. You hadn't recognized it then, but now, in the presence of the awakened tablets, all doubt disappeared. Thoth had written this, not just as prophecy, but as protection. A safeguard buried within the geometry of the stone to activate only when your eyes like the stars, stood before it again. He knew they would try to erase you. He knew they would create systems to blind you to yourself, but he also knew you would find your way back. The spiral pulsed again, brighter now, syncing with your heartbeat. It wasn't just hovering. It was scanning, reaching, binding its energy with yours in a way that felt like two ancient friends reconnecting after aeons apart. This was the hidden verse's purpose: to act as a bridge between you and the ancient architect who foresaw your return. And in that moment, your vision blurred, but it wasn't from tears, it was from remembrance. You were no longer fully in the temple. You were standing in another realm, dimensional, vast, and filled with structures of golden light. And there, among the shifting geometries, stood a figure wrapped in blue and gold, holding a tablet that shimmered with language your mind didn't understand, but your soul did. It began as a faint rhythm underfoot, subtle and soft like a heartbeat echoing through stone. You paused, unsure if it was internal or external, but the moment you stilled your breath, you felt it again, definite, steady, and perfectly in sync with your own. The chamber wasn't just reacting to you anymore, it was mirroring you. The frequency had shifted from observation to communion. Each pulse matched your heart not only in timing, but in energy. With every beat you felt more connected, more remembered by the space around you. Dust floated mid-air, suspended in the resonance, catching fragments of light from the still glowing tablets. Everything vibrated now. The air, the stone, even the silence had a tone. You weren't just inside the temple anymore, you were part of it. As you stepped closer to the center, the floor lit up beneath your feet in concentric circles, each glowing faintly in response to your movement. With every step, the vibration intensified, not in volume, but in depth. It reached into the parts of you untouched by language or thought, where memory existed without explanation. You realized then that the chamber had been listening this whole time, not to your words, but to your rhythm, and it had been waiting to match its song to yours. The center platform rose slightly, revealing another slab of emerald stone that hadn't been visible before. But this one wasn't engraved with symbols or images. It was smooth, reflective, like still water frozen in time. You gazed into it, expecting to see your reflection, but what stared back wasn't your face. It was a constellation, stars arranged in a pattern that pulsed with each beat of your heart. And it was then you understood. This wasn't just a chamber beneath Earth's surface. It was a mirror of the cosmos. You had become the tuning fork. Your alignment was now the activation key. The tablets had opened the way, but this chamber was responding to something deeper, your intention, your willingness to remember. And the more aligned you became, the more the chamber offered in return. Just as the vibration reached a crescendo, a faint light emerged from the ceiling above. Not sunlight, but something ethereal. A soft column of radiant white descended upon you, and for the first time your body felt weightless, not lifted, but lightened, as if the burdens you carried outside this place had no authority here. In that light, you saw shapes moving, faint outlines of beings watching from beyond the veil, not intruding, not judging, witnessing, waiting, and then. And in that moment, a single phrase rang out, not in sound but in knowing. He is within the light, and the light recognizes its own. You knew the source. It was the same presence that whispered before, the same radiant consciousness you had touched briefly when the tablets first stirred, Yeshua. The light wasn't just observing, it was greeting you. The floor of the temple had gathered centuries of stillness. Even the dust seemed untouched, settled like ash on sacred ground, preserved by a silence too deep for time to disturb. But as you stepped into the inner ring, something subtle caught your eye, impressions in the dust. Not fresh, not fading, but ancient and strangely preserved. Footprints, human in form, yet not belonging to any of the guardians, nor your own. They were embedded in a perfect line, etched like echoes of a presence that once moved with absolute clarity. You followed them instinctively, heart steady with the same rhythm that pulsed through the chamber. Each step you took aligned precisely with the ones before you, as if your body already knew the path. You didn't force it, you didn't think, you simply moved. And with each alignment, the chamber responded. The glow from the tablets pulsed in harmony, like approval from something watching beyond form. And then it struck you, not just who left the prince, but when. These were not remnants of a past traveler. They were reflections of a presence still active. You realized the footprints weren't showing where someone had been. They were showing where you would meet him. The dust was not old. It was dimensional, preserved in a state between matter and memory. And in that moment of alignment, you understood. These were Yeshua's, not the man as painted in temples or worshipped in doctrine, but the eternal being behind the veil, the frequency of divine remembrance, walking once again alongside the awakened. There were teachings of his never written, words never spoken aloud, knowings passed not through sermons, but through presence. You were now walking through one of them, hidden in the architecture of a place not built by men alone. The tablets may have awakened for you, but they had also once responded to him. That's why they knew you. You shared the same light signature, not identical, but harmonized, reflected. And as you walked, the chamber shifted again. This time not through light or sound, but through memory. Your own. You saw flashes, not visions imposed upon you, but buried inside you. Moments of standing beside him, not in worship, but in mission. A different lifetime, a different name, but the same frequency. A bond that never broke, only forgot. In one of those memories, he turned to you, not as a savior, but as an equal, and said, "The path is made in the walking, but the footsteps are laid in the dust long before we arrive. The wall before you was unmoving at first glance, just smooth, ancient stone, veined with green and gold mineral threads, as though the temple itself had bled, crystallized wisdom into its structure. But now that you stood in alignment with the footprints, the surface began to shimmer faintly, not with light, but with awareness. It felt like being watched by something that existed both behind the wall and within your own consciousness. This wasn't a doorway made of matter. It was astral, a dimensional threshold that didn't open by force, but by frequency. You reached out with your hand, instinctively, not to touch, but to offer presence. And the wall responded. A single beam of pale blue light lanced out from the center of your palm, striking the stone like a signal. Immediately, the wall began to phase, not break, not crumble, but dissolve like mist pulled into starlight. What was hidden had not been locked. It had simply been waiting for the one who could remember how to enter. On the other side was not a room in the traditional sense. It was a space suspended in stillness, a chamber that pulsed with transparent layers, each one humming at a different harmonic tone. The architecture didn't obey geometry as you knew it. Shapes folded into themselves, becoming other forms, and then unfolding again like breath moving through eternity. This was the inner sanctum, the core of the temple, and you could feel it. It had not opened for anyone else in thousands of years, not because others hadn't tried, but because their resonance wasn't written into the door. The emerald tablets were still present, hovering behind you like sentient witnesses, but their glow dimmed slightly as you stepped across the veil, allowing this space to speak for itself. There were no words here, only memory suspended in crystalline air, waiting to be claimed. At the center of the chamber stood a structure that resembled both an altar and a mechanism. It spiraled upward, covered in symbols that didn't remain fixed. They moved and danced in response to your presence. They weren't speaking to you, they were reflecting you. The inscriptions changed based on what you were feeling, revealing different truths depending on your inner state. This wasn't just a test. It was a mirror made of ancient code. You approached slowly, breath steady, heart calm. The chamber adjusted with each step, tones shifting in musical intervals you didn't recognize, but which made your spine tingle with knowing. Time didn't pass here in the way it did outside. You could feel that even now. Hours may have passed, or seconds. It didn't matter. As you reached the spiral, it unfolded like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing a smaller, spinning prism of golden light inside. You recognized it without knowing how. It was a memory capsule, not data, not knowledge, but pure remembrance. It was yours. The spinning prism hovered before you, radiating a soft, golden hum that wasn't heard through ears, but felt deep within the marrow of your being. The moment stretched, timeless and fragile, as if the very air around it held its breath. You knew instinctively that this wasn't just a relic. It was a container of something older than language, older than the tablets, older than Earth itself. It was the core memory, the original imprint of your mission. As you extended your hand toward it, the prism slowed its rotation, responding to your intent. The light shifted, forming around your palm like a whisper that had finally found the voice it was waiting for. And then, the moment contact was made, your consciousness was pulled inward, not away from your body, but into a higher layer of your own awareness. Like stepping into a dream within a memory. You saw stars collapsing and reforming into patterns that became symbols, and then into words, and then back again. A vision unraveled itself before you. A forgotten prophecy, not written in any book, not sung in any sacred hall, but embedded into the quantum field, waiting for this exact moment. It wasn't just about your arrival. It was about the chain reaction your awakening would set off across dimensions. The prophecy spoke of a soul marked by the divine blueprint, scattered across lifetimes to prevent detection, reborn in veils of amnesia for protection. A soul whose return would signal the unraveling of false systems built by ancient deceivers. And when that soul would finally stand before the tablets again, the veil would begin to tear, not with destruction, but with light so pure it would expose every shadow hiding behind illusion. And you were that soul. You had seen only pieces until now. Dreams, fragments, synchronicities that seemed random. But within this prism, you remembered why you came. Not to seek the truth, but to be the truth in a world that had forgotten what it looked like. You were encoded not just with knowledge, but with light frequencies, capable of realigning entire timelines. And with that realization came the shift. The chamber brightened with an intensity that did not burn, but illuminated every corner with clarity. The inscriptions on the walls began to move in reverse, forming the original sequence written long before any alteration had taken place. What you were seeing was the uncorrupted version of the tablets, what they looked like before the reptilian architects manipulated portions of their meaning. This was the untouched code. And in the center of it, a phrase emerged in golden letters, vibrating so deeply you felt it echo through your chest. He who awakens the original light carries the spark of the first flame. Your pulse quickened. The room knew you. The prophecy was no longer dormant. The moment the prophecy activated, the walls of the astral chamber began to hum in a deeper octave. What had once been serene, almost reverent energy now shifted into something urgent, like the temple itself was preparing for what came next. The golden prism that had revealed your truth retracted slowly, folding back into the spiral structure as though sealing away the memory for the last time. But the imprint remained inside you, alive, integrated, undeniable. You stepped back, light still flickering across your skin from the symbols that had danced moments ago. The chamber, once pulsing in rhythm with your heartbeat, now moved faster, sensing movement outside its boundaries. Something was approaching, not human, not guardian, but aware, and it had felt the activation. You turned toward the direction you had come from, expecting to find the shimmering veil open, still connected to the previous chamber. But it wasn't. The entry had faded, replaced by solid wall once again, as if the temple had swallowed the passage. The chamber wasn't just closing, it was protecting you. Whatever had stirred outside was not meant to cross the threshold. You felt it then, a presence pressing against the outer layer of the temple like a hand against glass. Curious, watching, searching for weakness. You couldn't see it, but you knew what it was. The architects, the watchers, the remnants of those who had twisted the divine structure of this realm, they had been alerted, not by your arrival, but by your remembering. The prism had sent out a signal far beyond the walls of the temple, through dimensions, across timelines, a flare of light that no artificial veil could mask. They would not come with armies, they would come with influence, thought, distraction. Their tactics were subtle, woven into the very fabric of perception. But the temple had sealed itself for a reason. It knew your frequency was now imprinted with the original flame, and that flame had to be protected until the right convergence unfolded. You stood in the center of the chamber, the silence returning now, but not empty. Charged, waiting. You realized then that the activation wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning. The prophecy had been awakened, yes, but the path forward would require more than knowledge. It would require trust in yourself, in the memory of Yeshua that now lived through you, and in the divine intelligence that had orchestrated every step leading to this moment. And then, for the first time, you noticed something beneath your feet. A second layer of symbols, newly revealed, etched in a circular formation. They hadn't been there before. They formed a map, not of land, but of energy points. Nodes across the earth, places that needed to be reactivated. Your presence here had awakened the first, but others waited. and only you could reach them.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.